Vamos a continuar la sesión con Susie Silbert, por favor. Hello, Susie. Welcome. Please. Con tu conferencia inaugural, Susie nos va a hablar sobre New Glass Movement. Ella es número 1 en el vidrio contemporáneo en el mundo. Ha trabajado durante 7 años en la dirección del Departamento de Vidrio Contemporáneo, Moderno y Contemporáneo en el Corning Museum of Glass, que muchos de ustedes saben que es el museo más importante del mundo en vidrio. Y además es muy importante decir que ella viene del origen del trabajo del vidrio y de la cerámica. Lo ha trabajado como artista, con lo cual verdaderamente es un perfil completísimo y estamos muy agradecidos y encantados de que hayas hecho ese viaje grandísimo desde Corning. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias. Qué bueno estar acá.
Not at all. She's going to talk, well, the title, finally, el título de tu ponencia.
Como Making New Glass.
Making New Glass.
Sí.
Pues podría contar muchísimas más virtudes y explicar mucho más largamente el currículum de Susie, pero si lo necesitan y quieren se lo podemos facilitar. Y también ustedes tienen en su carpeta una traducción que agradezco especialmente a Dolores María Torrero, que nos ha hecho la traducción para que puedan seguirla, porque ella va a dar su conferencia en inglés. Muchas gracias, Susie.
Bueno, me alegro de estar acá. Qué honor estar aquí con todos ustedes y para hacer esa cosa. Y disculpe porque no puedo hablar, no puedo dar la charla en español. La próxima puede, pero no, hoy no. Entonces, disculpe. Y muchas gracias por organizar. Es un gran trabajo organizar algo así, yo sé. Y entonces, muchas gracias a organizar a toda la gente que vienen para hacer esa cosa. Bueno, tengo una regla cuando dar charlas. Es una regla. A veces yo hablo un poquito rápido. ¡Qué malo! Y en inglés, qué malísimo. Entonces, si estoy hablando demasiado rápido, tiene que, es una regla, tiene que hacer esto. ¿En serio? ¿No estás tímido? Porque es para todo el comunitario. Entonces, empiezo. Y es la primera vez, muchas primeras, es la primera vez que estoy dando una charla sentado. Entonces, vamos a ver. Tengo mucha energía. Bueno, no quiero hablar en inglés. Bueno, today, hoy estoy, I'm like translating. Okay, in English, I will try to do it in English. It's more fun in Spanish. Today, I'll be talking about the way that contemporary glass came into being in the United States in an organized way. And I think it is a useful case study for how movements are made and the way that institutions can use their power to create change and opportunity. Sí, mejor en español. Bueno, pero no tengo la gramática para hacerlo. Bueno, to tell this story, I'm going to focus on the transformational project of New Glass at the Corning Museum of Glass, where I was for many years the curator of post-war and contemporary glass. So, tengo el pro. Bueno. In that role in Corning, in 2019, I organized the exhibition New Glass Now, more than 100 works made by artistas en más que 30 países, and that traveled in a slightly smaller version to the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., y to the Toyama Museum de Vidrio in Toyama, Japón. La meta de esa exposición was to spark new directions in glass. Empieza nuevas conversaciones a montar audiencias, ¿se puede decir? Audiencias for the work of contemporary glassmakers, workers, and thinkers. Yo tengo una idea de pensadores en vidrio, así que el arte no necesita de ver en vidrio, en el material de vidrio, pero son los pensamientos del vidrio, del entender vidrio que forman el arte. Bueno, esta exposición featured a range of works, including vessels and other traditional glass objects, alongside videos, performance, documentation, installations, and material experiments that push the boundaries of glass physically and conceptually. The idea was that these new works, both recently, now I'm in both languages, both newly made and presentando ideas nuevas, expand our understandings of what this incredible material is and could be. Pero, new glass itself is not new. Instead, new glass is an initiative, new glass con letras capitales, the initiative of the Corning Museum of Glass that stretches back 60 years, nearly to the museum's founding, and encompasses 2 major exhibitions and 1 long-standing publication. Unified by a shared methodological approach, these projects have contributed meaningfully to the way that contemporary glass has been seen, collected, written about, and produced from the mid-20th century through today. So, this lecture introduces 3 major new glass undertakings: Las Exposiciones Glass, 1959, New Glass, a Worldwide Survey in 1979, and the publication New Glass Review, the 40th anniversary of which my exhibition, New Glass Now, celebrates. And this talk stakes a claim for the contributions of new glass to the development of the field of contemporary glass as a whole. I think this is important because what we are talking about today, what you just spoke about, is the way that the understanding of glass, the making of glass, is so important. And to make us all understand why what artists do in the studios, our artesanías do in the studios, is important. And this idea was, how do we get people to understand it? So each of these shows changed the field of contemporary glass entirely. Glass 1959 brought the field of contemporary glass together for the first time and created the landscape out of which the American studio glass movement grew. New Glass, a Worldwide Survey in 1979 brought the ideas of American studio glass and studio glass abroad to a global stage and started collecting by individuals and institutions. And New Glass Review for circulating ideas in glass from around the world every year. And New Glass Now, as we've already heard, for reorienting conversations in glass more in the image of today's makers. But more than anything else, the story of New Glass is the story of creating change. So, the Corning Museum of Glass was founded in 1951 by the founding family of the glass company now known as Corning Incorporated, la compañía que hace el vidrio de teléfonos y todo eso. Fue como un regalo al país con una misión o meta to tell the world about glass. The earliest exhibitions of the museum focused on vidrio viejo, como topics like Renaissance Venetian and early American glass. However, by 1956, the museum leadership began to think of a way to tell the world about contemporary glass. The motto of the company was that Corning significa recerca en vidrio. And that idea that recerca es esencial, that mining the unknown is esencial a comprender la material de vidrio, infused the museum in its earliest moments. And so there was an orientation not just to the vidrio viejo que fue conocido, pero also toward thinking about new ways of glassmaking that had not yet been conocido or understood or shown within a museum context. So, the 1950s were, of course, a design-rich time. But despite an increasing interest in objects in general, there had never been a museum exhibition devoted specifically to contemporary glass from around the world. Seeing this rich opportunity, the Corning Museum's founding director, Tom Buechner, en una pintura de él fue una pintura, and assistant director, Paul Perot, decided to plan for an exhibition of contemporary glass. In researching this topic several years ago, I was able to speak to Paul Perot, who was very old but really sharp. And he told me, or I asked him, why did the museum want to do this exhibition, Glass 1959? And he told me, well, we saw that there was a need. We saw all this incredible work happening around the world, and we saw that there was an opportunity to bring those artists and designers into conversation with each other. The idea of bringing artists in conversation with each other went into everything, influenced not only the outcome they hoped the exhibition would have in the world, but also created the context for the way the show would be organized. What they wanted was to make a major impact on the language of objects and to firmly establish glass as an important field of cultural production. Justo así, como estamos hablando hoy. To accomplish this, the exhibition could not only showcase the viewpoint of just one curator, it could not even be the work of a group of people just from the Corning Museum. No, they understood that to have an impact that would extend beyond the walls of their museum, to really create a conversation in glass, they needed to bring in people from beyond, from the wider fields of art, craft, and design. And so, Tom Buechner developed an innovative, democratic model that has been the cornerstone of all new glass projects since then. Se inventó submisiones, se puede decir? Se inventó objetos de compañías y fábricas y vidrieros en todo el mundo y después preguntó a un panel, ¿cómo se dice? Unos, ¿qué? Grupo de expertos de diseñadores, pensadores y curadoras to escoger entre ellos o no sé qué, displaying the objects in a traveling exhibition and an illustrated catalog. So, all told, en preparación para esa exposición, se invitó submisiones, ¿se puede decir? ¿Cómo se dice? They invited, bueno, they invited people to send 750 glass manufacturers around the world. They sent, I should have made a slide with these numbers porque no puedo decirlo en español así. Sent 1,814 objects, como 2,000, casi 2,000 objetos a Nueva York, where, donde they were evaluated in person by 5 seleccionistas who ultimately chose 300 objetos de 23 países para Glass 1959. Okay. Bueno, eso fue la única pieza de España. Solo una. Bueno, así. No sé. Sí, debo hacer más recerca. Todos los records de los papeles del Corning Museum fue mojada en flood en 1972. Entonces no hay mucha de esa época, pero tengo que hacer más recerca a ver si había más entrantes de España. No sé. Pero yes. But I wanted to show you this now, porque yo sé if I was sitting where you are, I would wonder, what was there from Spain? So this is what there was, very little. And I think it would be, I think it's really possible que los seleccionistas de esa exposición no entendieron las obras de Vidrio españoles. Puede ser. Sí, así que no comprendieron, no lo entendieron, couldn't see how to put it in the exhibition. And I think for this reason, it's important to understand, it's always important to understand quiénes están haciendo las selecciones. Entonces, en most exposiciones, típicamente solo pensamos en los objetos. A veces pensamos en las artistas, pero no mucho. Bueno, las personas aquí piensan en las seleccionistas, en las curadores o no sé qué, pero la gente en general no. But it's really important because las seleccionistas, los curadores son la gente que build, they shape lo que vemos y la historia que contamos. So, in inglés, to put it another way, it's the layered voices of the selectors that creates the outcome. And the founders, the organizers, the directors in Corning understood that. And they understood that making these choices transparente para los visitantes would give their project poder to speak more broadly and to be understood by more fully than by hiding that information and presenting the exhibition as the finished work of como full consensus, como el museo. Ellos querían que los visitantes y que toda la gente saben que la selección ha sido por gente, por individuos. And so they came up with a system that's still in place in New Glass to this day. They presented cada objeto con los iniciales, se puede decir, del seleccionista que chose it, the one that chose it. Tiene los iniciales. So, y aquí se puede ver, maybe, este objeto de Finlandia, de Tapio Vorkala, tiene como casi todos los seleccionistas lo escojaban. This subtle practice is simple and radical, lifted the veil on the curatorial process, revealing that there is not one true objective vision que lo que es buen vidrio, but rather muchos voces that met en un lugar, que vienen en un lugar para hacer selecciones. Es poderoso, poderoso por museos then y ahora. Bueno, it's poderoso, it's tan poderoso that in New Glass Now, I added little statements by the selectors onto the labels into the museum. Also, esto es la única entrada de España en mi exposición. Lo siento. So I think it's importante to show the reasons. Like the reason that esa práctica de New Glass, de decir que solo dos seleccionistas han escogido, gracias. Sí, es un comunitario. Muchas gracias por asistir. Bueno, que solo dos. Yo y Eric Chen fue la única que escogió ese objeto. I think it's important so you can see that. And I think what is most important is that this way, viewers, some maybe, understand that not every selector liked everything. And what I think is important about that is that usually when we go into a museum, we think all the work is there because somebody really important chose it, and we have to like all of it. But we are people. And we don't like everything. And I hope that this process allows the visitor to see that you don't have to. Look, the other people didn't choose this piece, pero yo me gusta. Y con esas quotes, esa little writing con el nombre del seleccionista, es ojalá que es una puerta y una invitación al visitante a la exposición que participar en Vidrio, porque yo creo que si vamos a crecer, que vamos a expand la comunicación y la conversación, tenemos que tener puertas. Entonces, back to history. We're talking about New Glass now, but really, we need to understand quién fue las seleccionistas in 1959. It fue Edgar Kaufman Jr., who started his career at the Museum of Modern Art in Nueva York. He worked there from 1941 to 1959. Y él es lo más bien conocido por una serie de exposiciones que hice durante el mundo editorial que se llama Useful Objects, y después exposiciones que se llaman Good Design. Y fue como cosas para la casa, affordable, que no cuestan tanto para la casa. And he comes from, his family was one of the first families in the United States that had department store, like a big store. So he was always thinking about the home. And that background, I think, influenced the way the show looked. This is the exhibition looked like somebody's home. And the idea was to help people imagine these objects in la casa. So he was the oldest one on the panel, and he was considered como el abuelo because he had the broadest art knowledge and had been working with exhibitions and objects the longest. So this is so small. In 1959, the seleccionistas were asked to choose tres piezas they liked best of all. And these selections, which you can't really see, show that he liked mostly restrained objetos de vidrio transparente que son good design. But he also allowed himself to choose the visionary work of this is so small, but Eric Hoagland, the Swedish artist Eric Hoagland. Okay, the next one fue Russell Lines, who conoces Marie Kondo, ¿sí? Bueno, él es como Marie Kondo de su día. Como Kondo, he made his choices como de delight, que tiene que tener delight. Pero él fue también una crítica cultural y el editor de Harper's Magazine, one of the oldest magazines in the United States. And he also wrote a bunch of books, many books, about cómo hagan decisiones. But he also, was funny, porque snub significa como así. Entonces, él estaba humoroso and humor and delight. He also wrote a book called The Tastemakers, which analyzed the way that objects or things get considered good and who gets to consider them. And he wrote another essay that worked to understand how things are categorized within culture, called highbrow, lowbrow, middlebrow, like what is taste. So I think it's interesting that the museum would choose someone as a selector, como Lines, that had spent so much time thinking about how we form our ideas of what is good. So I think he was really, somebody that was trying to abrir la conversación. Y I'm sorry for these pictures. I I'm sorry. His 3 objects that he chose as his favorite, lo más favorito de todo, were like a range of works from the time. A highly colored, muy coloroso, Zanfírico Vase by Dino Martens, que ya y ahora está en la colección de Corning. Y este piece que parece como emoji de Bengt Edenfalk de Sweden, and a goblet that you can't really see, muy restrained, de Raurell. Es una pieza en lo mismo set. Kaufman, el otro, chose a similar one. Okay. And the third selector was Leslie Cheek Jr. Y él fue uno del director del Virginia Museum of Fine Arts at the time. Fue uno de los administradores de arte más progresiva en todos los Estados Unidos en esa época. Es más conocido por ese Artmobile, así, que en los años 50, y él tenía una idea de gente están tienen mucho miedo de ir a museos, y especialmente en Virginia, que es muy rural, muchas áreas rural. Entonces él tiene ese Artmobile que vienen pinturas muy famosas a la gente rural, y por eso muy progresivo. Pero en vidrio fue como lo más aburrido bueno, él dice que escogí solo botellas tradicionales. Quería escoger cosas que parecen viejos y que son funcional. In his essay, he wrote, glass is so bound up in its ancient tradition of being useful that I don't appreciate it as a material for higher aesthetic expression. Como él no pensé que glass puede ser más que funcional. And I think his selections are a reminder that it is possible to be muy progresiva en una área y no, muy conservativa en otra. Bueno, the fourth selector is George Nakashima, who is an American woodworker and leading participante in American studio craft. And one of the most important things, I think, about Nakashima, and that gave him a particular vision in 1959, is that he worked both as a artesanía independiente, haciendo piezas entirely con sus manos, pero también in limited production, hiring other people to see his designs through. And I think it gave him a sensitivity to both fully handmade objects and small production. And I think it's interesting that at this time, when in the United States there weren't very many craftsmen using glass, that they chose a craftsman as one of the selectors, because they saw the future that was coming. I'm sorry about these pictures. Nakashima chose, they're fine, they're totally fine. He chose, they don't seem so crafty, they don't seem demasiado de artesanía, una sensibilidad artesanía. He chose un piece of stemware, a goblet, and he, like others, chose a vase by Bengt Edenfalk, the Swedish designer. But he also chose this little bird, the pajarito. And he wrote that it probably wasn't intended as art of any kind and was most likely made from a cast-off piece of glass from another job. But it was important because of its spontaneity, whimsy, and joy, allegro, in being. And that we often need relief from a grim aesthetic determinism. Like we need to be saved from only thinking in one way, and that we yearn, he said, for leprechauns. Y no sé esa palabra, leprechaun, pero los de Irlanda, como small leprechauns y small demons, como demonios, como queremos mágico en el mundo, y eso fue una puerta de mágico. And I think he's talking about what studio glass was developed to provide. Okay, the last selector was Gio Ponti, the famed Italian designer and editor of the Italian design magazine Domus, who unveiled his massive architectural achievement, the Pirelli Tower in Milan, in the same year he came to judge works in 1959. I think he was the most forward-thinking of all the selectors. He chose Lucrecia Moyano de Muñiz's vaso antropomórfico, one of the few handmade sculptural pieces in the exhibition. She's Argentinian. Alongside handmade objects and casserole dish and one of the plainest tumblers you can imagine, the Czech diseñador Vera Lišková, who would go on to be really important in the next exhibition with a totally different sculptural work. So even as Gio Ponti signaled the future of studio glass, he saw la continuación de diseño. He was in both worlds, but he still pointed ahead. Okay. It is nearly imposible to overstate the impact, el impacto de esta exposición. Fue la primera exposición de vidrio contemporáneo internacional, creo, aparte en los Estados Unidos, pero creo que en el mundo en esa época. Y si bien la historia de vidrio a 5 o 6 ciudades americanas. Fue en Corning, después a Nueva York, al Metropolitan Museum, después a Virginia, Toledo, Ohio, and the Art Institute in Chicago, and also in Pittsburgh. And it was, no sé dónde estamos. Okay, aquí, Bueno, aquí estamos. Oh, here. It was covered extensively in the newspapers who were writing particularly at consumers, particularly women. But its greatest impact might have been on glassmakers themselves. Within these dense displays, de era atómica, the artists, designers, and manufacturers from around the world could see themselves as part of a global dialogue por la primera vez. Like before this exhibition, I think, there wasn't an idea of being a contemporary glassmaker. There was just somebody that worked in glass here and here and here and here. But when this exhibition brought everybody together, suddenly there was an idea that you were part of something bigger. They weren't just, it was a collective activity. And when you're a community, as you know, then you can really do something. And this is the reason that there's the manifesto and there's all the work that you're doing here. So the range of possibilities, I think, encoded in the objects that were on display, presented approaches to the material that were unseen and unimagined before. So there was this idea of the sculptural potential banked in Falk's work. There's a range. Lucrecia Moyano de Muñiz, the American artist Idris Eckhart. There was John Burton, another American who started to do flame working. I can't remember the word for that. Sopleto? ¿Se puede ser? Okay, bueno. Japanese work, there was a range. But nowhere, I think, was this sculptural potential more pronounced than in the work of the Czech artists. I think this is incredible. This exhibition was la primera vez que las obras de Stanislav Lebensky y Jaroslava Brichtova, que son muy importantes en developing the technique of casting and bringing glass to a sculptural sense, had never been seen in the United States before this. And they almost weren't included at all. Because los seleccionistas that I just introduced you to, con su pensamiento de diseño solo, y que aman vessels and goblets y todo eso, completely overlooked this work. They didn't choose any of it. They didn't choose any. This work only came to the United States and was in this exhibition because the museum directors included 60 works for diversidad geográfico. Entonces, por eso. Pero eso fue lo más importante de toda la exposición. The inclusion of this work and the exhibition as a whole had a direct impact on the American studio glass movement that would grow in the United States just a few years later, starting in 1962, when Harvey Littleton, who was the son of the first physicist at Corning Glass Works, and later a professor of ceramics and glass at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, held what's called the Toledo, como en inglés, Toledo Glass Workshops on the ground of the Toledo Museum of Art, putting vidrio en las manos de los artistas por la primera vez en los Estados Unidos. But Harvey didn't come up with the idea of doing this by himself. Instead, what became the Toledo Glass Workshops grew out of a series of reuniones, no tan distinto de este, including uno just 2 meses después de abrir Glass 1959, where glass practitioners and thinkers, and including people from Corning, strategized a way to develop a studio glass movement in the United States. They got together like this and they said, tenemos que tener artes en vidrio, tenemos que tener esa artesanía en los Estados Unidos. Y they agreed that glass blowing, soplando vidrio, is the way to get people excited about glass, and that Littleton would be the person that would bring this to the world. Okay. And here they are. Soon after the 1959 show opened, Tom Buechner, the director, left Corning to become the director at the Brooklyn Museum of Art en la ciudad de Nueva York. Después de 10 años, él regresó al Corning y tenía como pasión para la misión del Corning Museum to tell people about glass. In this time, su atención fue totalmente en the American Studio Glass Movement, que crecieron mucho en 10 años. And he was interested in how the museum could actively help, dar apoyo a ese movimiento. So he had a meeting, this is the meeting, in 1975 with leading studio glass artists, members of Steuben Glass, and Paul Smith, who was the director of the Museum of Contemporary Craft in New York City. And they all came together to come up with recommendations, como ese manifesto. And here they are. Buechner always loved to poner iniciales después de cosas en las exposiciones, pero acá en los minutes. Entonces, por eso yo sé que la idea es de tener New Glass Review, lo que fue New Glass Review later, fue la idea del Chihuly y otra persona. So, over 2 days, they came up with ideas for the way that the museum could contribute to the growth of the studio glass movement. And among these ideas were recommendations to create major circulating surveys that would be national and international with a good, detailed catalog. They also recommended the development of a slide archive with a regular distribution. These ideas fueron las semillas that would grow into the publication New Glass Review and the 1979 exhibition New Glass, a Worldwide Survey, and its accompanying catalog. And, incidentally, they are the recommendations that the museum would continue to act on for the next 40 years, and they're still acting on, even though mostly the Corning Museum forgot that this important meeting happened, but they're still doing the things. So, I forgot how long I've been talking for. 5 minutes? Oh my gosh, it's been so long. Good. All right, then I'm going to blow through it. You already heard. See, it's hard to do it. I should have just read. Okay, by 1976, they had the museum, más despacio, pero 5 minutos. Like halfway. I'm sorry. They started what became New Glass Review, and they started this exhibition. So, the exhibition, in getting ready for this one, they had new ways. They didn't invite companies in the same way. They spread the story through the vehicles that they had. So they had the Glass Art Society. One member made 2 songs about submitting his work to New Glass Review, and instead of choosing from the objects themselves, they looked at so many slides, como 6,000 slides to choose them. And in the end, they chose a lot of them. They chose, and most of, sorry, now I'm trying to go faster. They chose mostly the work of, most of the submissions were from individual artists. Antes, en 1959, fue totalmente, las submisiones fueron de compañías, pero en esa época fueron totalmente de artes. And the selectors, and here you can see some of the works and the way they were shown, really different from 1959. There's more. The selectors were Franca Santi Gualtieri, the first woman involved in New Glass. She was the editor of Abitare, the Italian magazine dedicated mostly to interior design. And she chose mostly, I think I sent the wrong, I think my updates didn't work, that's what happened. She chose mostly conservative things. She chose by herself, when she chose by herself, she chose also goblets, clear goblets, they were hers. But when she chose together, they were everyone together. Also was Werner Schmalenbach, director of the Museum of Modern Art in Dusseldorf. He was an arts purist, and he didn't think that glass could be considered art, really. He was suspect of that. And he also chose all of the beer glasses that were in the show. Basically, they were all German, and he chose all of those. But he also wrote that it is nonsensical to want to bring the art of glass unconditionally into the field of fine art, but that there was often more artistic genius in these glass pieces than in many of the works of painting and sculpture. Paul Smith was an innovative director of the Museum of Contemporary Craft in New York City, and he made the choices that are most recognizable to students of studio glass. From his vantage point at the Contemporary Crafts Museum, he was in most direct conversation with studio craft and studio glass artists than any of the others. And often, he was the only selector of pieces that became really important to the history of studio glass. Finally, Russell Lynes, Marie Kondo, was the abuelo de ese grupo de seleccionistas. And he thought about things in the same way. Delight was the most important. So the works were like really different from 1959. They showed the growth of the field and the incredible strides that artists had made in their command of and conceptual approaches to the material. Here you can see some more. I think some more of the different ways. Vera Lishkova in the center, in 1959, her cups, her vaso, she made vasos in 1959, but in 1979, she made this incredible piece in the center, just to show how much the field changed. And more, the sculptural ambition of the work was really different. Well, I had a slide of Spanish work. Here at least is Joaquín Torres Esteban. Fue la única entrada de España. But this exhibition went viral, ¿se dicen? Fue en Life magazine, lo más leído en todo el mundo. Es como going viral in TikTok, and everybody knew about it. And the show traveled to many different places in the United States, and it traveled abroad to the Victorian Albert Museum and to the Musée d'Art Décoratif in Paris and to Cebu, Japan. And each place it traveled, the museum started collecting glass for the first time. And I think, but I'm not sure, didn't Torres Esteban go to see the show in Paris? Y después, bueno, no sé. The show was, no? I don't know. I'm not sure either, but yeah. After the success of this exhibition, the museum inició New Glass Review, that every year artists would send submissions from around the world, and they would be collected, and a panel would choose from them, and now it's been going on for 42 years, the same sort of way. So, aquí estamos. ¿Por qué es importante? Why am I telling you this whole story? And I think that after more than 40 años, contemporary glass is in a moment of change. Just as in these earlier periods, es el momento that inviting new audiences to participate in our incredible material. And that's the reason that I did this exhibition, New Glass Now, which I showed you about a little bit in the beginning. And I think it's the reason why it's important to bring people in, to show them the kinds of works that there are. Now I'm flipping through quickly, these are my selectors from many different places. There's me, yes. And the kinds of works were really different again. You know, there were design works that would be comfortable in 1959. They would have been fine. But there's also works that are really different, that deal with cultural and social issues, like these works thinking about feminismo, or thinking about, bueno, eso no sé la palabra, pero queer issues in glass. And there's also many works that deal with place, like the work by Atelier NL, a la izquierda, que se hagan vidrio del sand from particular playas, and es como terroir, to understand the place. And Andrea De Pante, del Argentina, tengo que decirlo, a la derecha, que es como vidrio soplado, that I think speaks about the global world and how we are all together. Okay, I'll be done. I feel so bad. I don't like to go over. I taught for many years in the university, and my students taught me never to be over, so I feel really bad going more now. But I think I'll leave you just with this last image, because I think this is, it shows how we are always learning, how artists are always leading. And if we, as institutions, as individuals, as makers, as people can bring together new ideas, can make space for thinking, we can grow in new ways. So this is glass that's thrown on a potter's wheel and fired. It's really incredible project. The end. Thank you so much. Sorry for talking so much.